Have you ever faced injustice in the most unexpected place? What happens when a pilot's prejudice meets an unstoppable force? Imagine stepping onto a flight ready to embark on a journey, only to be stopped in your tracks, not because of a security issue, not because of a mistake, but because of the color of your skin. For Ava Robinson, a confident and accomplished woman, what should have been an ordinary travel day turned into an encounter that would shake the foundations of an entire industry. Little did the pilot know, the passenger he dismissed so easily wasn't just anyone, and her husband's arrival would change everything in a way no one could have predicted. Stay with me, because this story is about justice, karma, and the power of standing up for what's right. The hum of chatter filled the air as passengers shuffled through the bustling terminal. Flight 739 to Aspen was nearly ready for departure, and the boarding gate pulsed with the usual pre-flight tension. The sharp clicks of Ava Robinson's heels echoed against the tiled floor as she approached the counter. She was a picture of poise and sophistication. Her tailored navy suit hugged her tall, elegant frame, and her polished leather handbag swayed lightly at her side. She adjusted her scarf, a gift from her husband David, and handed her boarding pass to the gate agent with a polite smile. The young man behind the counter froze for a moment, his gaze darting nervously to the pilot standing nearby. Captain Matthew Blake, a tall man with a square jaw and an air of arrogant authority, leaned casually against the counter, his eyes narrowed as they settled on Ava. "First class?" the gate agent asked hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Ava replied, her tone calm but firm. She had experienced this hesitation before, a fleeting pause, a questioning glance that revealed more than it concealed. Still, she remained composed. Years of practice had taught her that dignity was her sharpest weapon. The gate agent scanned her ticket and was about to wave her through when Captain Blake stepped forward. He placed a firm hand on the counter, stopping the process. "Excuse me," Blake said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ma'am, are you sure you're at the right gate?" Ava turned her gaze to him, her dark eyes unwavering. "Quite sure," she replied, her voice steady. Blake chuckled, a sound that grated like nails on a chalkboard. "It's just unusual, we don't often see first-class passengers." His sentence trailed off, but the implication hung heavily in the air. Ava's lips tightened into a thin line. She had heard this before. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" she asked, her tone cool and direct. The gate agent shifted uncomfortably, but Blake remained unyielding. "I'd just like to verify a few things before we allow you to board," he said, his eyes glinting with something darker than mere curiosity. Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanging. "You're the pilot, not security," she pointed out. "Are ticket checks part of your duties now?" Blake smirked, clearly enjoying the small crowd that had begun to form around them. "Let's just say I like to ensure everything runs smoothly on my flights, protocol, you know." But wait, could this confrontation spiral into a battle that exposes a deeper truth? Keep watching to see how Ava's strength turns the tables. The murmurs among the other passengers grew louder, some exchanged uneasy glances, while others simply averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. Ava could feel their stares, the weight of their silence pressing down on her. Still, she refused to shrink under it. "If there's a problem," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "I'd like to know what it is, otherwise I'd appreciate it if you let me board." Blake's smirk faltered slightly, but he didn't back down. "Security concerns," he said vaguely. "We've had some incidents lately, you understand, I'm sure." Ava's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She knew better than to let him see her anger. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "I'll contact my husband," she said simply. Blake laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Oh, by all means," he said, "but I'm afraid no phone call is going to change the rules." Ava raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She dialed the number and waited for the familiar voice on the other end. "David," she said, her voice steady but tinged with steel, "I need you at gate 14 now." The reaction was immediate. Blake's smirk returned, wider this time, as though he believed he had already won. "No one's coming to save you," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Ava to hear. But Ava didn't flinch. She returned her phone to her bag and stepped aside, her posture unbroken. "I'll wait," she said, her voice calm and composed. The tension at the gate was palpable as the minutes ticked by. Passengers whispered amongst themselves, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Ava remained still, her gaze fixed on the entrance to the terminal. When David Robinson arrived, the air seemed to shift. Tall and commanding in a sharp suit, he moved with purpose, his mere presence enough to part the small crowd that had gathered. His expression was unreadable, but his dark eyes burned with quiet intensity as they locked onto Captain Blake. And in that moment, everything began to change. The soft murmur of the crowd fell to a hush as David Robinson strode toward the gate. His gait was measured, his tailored suit immaculate, and his presence exuded authority. A hush of recognition passed through the more observant passengers. There was something undeniably commanding about him, even if they didn't know exactly who he was. David's eyes found Ava instantly. She stood tall and poised, a beacon of calm amid the chaos, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the subtle tightness in her jaw, and the way her fingers clasped her handbag a little too firmly. He felt a surge of anger rise within him, not at her, but at the man who had dared to challenge her dignity. Ava stepped forward as he approached. "David," she said, her voice steady but laced with a relief she wouldn't admit. She knew he would come, he always did, but his presence now felt like a fortress between her and the injustice she faced. David's gaze flicked to Captain Blake, who stood near the counter with an air of smugness. Blake didn't recognize him yet, but the subtle disdain in his posture made it clear he didn't see David as a threat. That assumption would soon cost him. David turned to the gate agent first, his voice calm but commanding. "I'd like an explanation as to why my wife is being prevented from boarding her flight." The young man stammered, his eyes darting nervously to Blake for guidance. The captain stepped forward, his confidence unchecked. "I'm ensuring the safety of my passengers," Blake said smoothly. "Your wife raised some concerns." David's brow furrowed, his tone sharpening. "Concerns? What concerns? She presented a valid ticket, didn't she?" Blake hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "Well, yes," he admitted, "but I have the authority to make decisions regarding passenger safety." David's voice dropped, each word cutting like a blade. "And what exactly about my wife makes her a safety concern?" Blake's smugness wavered, but he quickly recovered, offering a patronizing smile. "I don't have to justify my decisions to you." David took a step closer, his presence towering. "You do now." The crowd held their breath, the tension thick enough to cut. Blake, visibly irritated by the challenge, folded his arms. "And who exactly do you think you are to demand that?" David's gaze didn't waver. "David Robinson," he said evenly, "owner of this airline." The room seemed to freeze, gasps rippled through the crowd, and the gate agent's face drained of color. Blake's smirk vanished, replaced by a stunned silence. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. David didn't give him time to recover. "Your actions today have not only humiliated my wife but have also jeopardized the integrity of this company. I demand a full explanation right now." Blake stammered, his arrogance crumbling. I was just following protocol," he managed, though the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. David's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Do not insult my intelligence by hiding behind protocol. This is about prejudice, plain and simple, and it ends here." Blake's face flushed red, his bravado slipping further. "Sir, I was only trying to—" "You were trying to what?" David interrupted. "Assert your superiority over a paying passenger, over my wife? I will not tolerate this." Ava, silent until now, stepped forward. Her voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced even Blake's feeble protests. "I've experienced men like you before, Captain," she said. "You think your position entitles you to treat people however you please, but today you've crossed the wrong line." Blake looked between them, his confidence eroded. "It was a misunderstanding," he tried weakly, his voice trembling. David's gaze was icy. "The only misunderstanding here is your assumption that your behavior would go unchecked. Security will escort you off this flight. Consider this your last day in uniform." Gasps and murmurs broke out among the passengers. Blake's face contorted in disbelief. "You can't be serious," he spluttered. "I've been with this airline for over 10 years. And in that time, how many others have you treated like this?" David's voice was calm, but there was an edge of finality in his words. "Your tenure ends today." Security arrived moments later, summoned by the gate staff, who now stood rigid with fear. The officers approached Blake, who began to protest vehemently, but David raised a hand. "Escort him off the premises," he instructed, "and ensure his access credentials are revoked immediately." The security officers nodded, their movements efficient and unemotional. Blake's protests grew louder as they led him away, his voice fading into the distance. The passengers, silent and still processing the scene, broke into scattered applause. David turned back to Ava, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for her. Ava gave him a small smile, her composure unbroken. "I am now." David nodded and addressed the gate agent. "Ensure my wife is boarded first and provided every courtesy." The young man nodded hastily, his hands trembling as he scanned Ava's boarding pass. "Right away, Mr. Robinson, Mrs. Robinson, please, this way." As Ava walked toward the boarding tunnel, David lingered, ensuring everything was handled properly. His gaze swept over the remaining staff and passengers, silently daring anyone to question the events that had unfolded. And then, without a word, he turned and followed his wife onto the plane. The plush leather of the first-class seat offered a comforting reprieve, but Ava's mind remained restless. She adjusted the silk scarf around her neck and leaned back slightly, her gaze fixed on the cabin window. Beyond the glass, the runway stretched endlessly under the golden glow of the setting sun, an image of tranquility at odds with the storm that had just unfolded. The faint sound of footsteps drew her attention. A flight attendant approached, her expression apologetic, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Mrs. Robinson," the attendant began, her voice tinged with both respect and unease, "on behalf of the crew, I want to deeply apologize for the treatment you experienced earlier. It was unacceptable." Ava turned her gaze toward the woman, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone cool but not unkind. She didn't feel the need to say more, the weight of the earlier humiliation still hung heavy in the air. The attendant nodded quickly and backed away, leaving Ava to her thoughts. Moments later, David slid into the seat beside her, his movements purposeful but quieter than usual. His face, usually so composed, carried a trace of tension, a reminder of how the day had begun to spiral out of control. "Are you okay?" he asked, breaking the silence, his voice low, almost hesitant, as if he feared the answer. Ava glanced at him, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "I am," she replied, "but you look like you're not." David sighed, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "I can't help thinking about how many others he might have treated that way," he admitted. "How many people didn't have someone to step in for them?" Ava nodded, her expression softening. "It's not the first time I've dealt with someone like Captain Blake," she said, "and I doubt it will be the last, but today felt different." David leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "How so?" Ava turned back to the window, her voice quieter now. "It wasn't just his words, David, it was the way he looked at me, as though I didn't belong, as though I was trespassing in a space that could never be mine, no matter how much I've earned it." David's jaw tightened. He hated the idea of her enduring such moments, and the realization that they had happened far more often than she let on only deepened his anger. "I should have been here sooner," he said. "I should have." Ava's voice was firm, cutting through his self-recrimination. She reached over, placing her hand on his. "You were there when it mattered, that's what counts." The warmth of her touch grounded him, and he exhaled slowly, nodding. "You're right," he admitted, "but I won't let this slide. Blake's behavior isn't just about you, it's about the culture he thought would protect him." Ava's gaze met his, her dark eyes steady and thoughtful. "Then let's change it," she said, "not just for me, but for everyone who's been in my shoes." David smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride lighting his features. "We will," he promised, "starting with a complete overhaul of the airline's policies, and I want you to lead it." Ava blinked, caught off guard. "Me? You?" David confirmed, "No one understands the stakes better than you do, Ava, you've lived this. You can help ensure no one else has to." For a moment, Ava said nothing, her mind racing through the implications of his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. "If it means making a difference, I'll do it." David squeezed her hand gently. "You always do." The sound of the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their imminent takeoff. Ava and David settled into their seats as the engines roared to life, the plane hurtling down the runway and lifting into the air. As the cabin lights dimmed and the world below grew smaller, Ava closed her eyes, letting the hum of the engine soothe her frayed nerves. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a moment of peace, knowing that change was already in motion. But as the plane soared higher, a single thought lingered in her mind: Captain Blake might be gone, but the fight for equality was far from over, and she was ready to lead it. The morning after their flight, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of David and Ava Robinson's penthouse apartment. The city skyline glimmered in the distance, but neither of them was in a mood to enjoy the view. Ava sat at the kitchen island, her laptop open and a fresh cup of coffee in her hand. She was reviewing an email from David's legal team, detailing the official termination of Captain Matthew Blake. The language was precise and damning: a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and an immediate dismissal for violating company ethics. David entered the room, tying his cufflinks as he prepared for another day of meetings. He paused, noting the tension in Ava's posture. "Are you still thinking about yesterday?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Ava glanced up, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just about yesterday," she admitted. "It's about everything it represents. Captain Blake wasn't the problem, he was a symptom of something much bigger." David nodded, leaning against the counter. "You're right, that's why we're going to address it, not just for him, but for the culture that allowed him to thrive." Ava closed her laptop, turning to face him fully. "I've been thinking about what you said on the plane," she began, "about me leading the effort to change things." "And?" David prompted, his gaze steady. "I want to do it," Ava said, her voice resolute, "but not just as a figurehead. If I'm going to take this on, I want full control over the initiative." David smiled faintly, impressed by her determination. "Done," he said without hesitation. "Whatever resources you need, they're yours." Ava smiled back, though her mind was already racing with ideas. "It's not just about policies," she said. "We need to change mindsets. That means training, accountability, and a way for employees to report issues without fear of retaliation." David raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a full-scale overhaul." "It is," Ava agreed, "and it's long overdue." Ava's first meeting with the airline's executive team was tense. The conference room, with its glass walls and minimalist decor, felt like a fishbowl as the team waited for her to speak. She stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding despite her calm demeanor. "Let me start by saying this," she began, her voice steady but firm. "Yesterday's incident was not an isolated one, it was a symptom of systemic issues that we've ignored for too long." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ava didn't flinch. "We can't build a brand that represents luxury and excellence if our values don't reflect those ideals," she continued. "From today forward, every employee at every level will undergo comprehensive diversity and inclusion training, and I will personally oversee the development and implementation of these programs." One of the executives, a middle-aged man with a skeptical expression, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Mrs. Robinson, changing an entire culture is a monumental task. It could disrupt operations." Ava turned her gaze toward him, her eyes sharp. "With all due respect, Mr. Harris, tolerating discrimination has already disrupted operations. What happened yesterday wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was a betrayal of our customers' trust." David, seated at the opposite end of the table, watched the exchange silently, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Ava didn't need his support, she commanded the room on her own. Another executive, a younger woman, leaned forward. "What about reporting? A lot of employees don't speak up because they're afraid of retaliation." "Good question," Ava said, her tone encouraging. "We'll implement an anonymous reporting system, managed by a third party. That way, employees can report concerns without fear of backlash." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, and Ava pressed on. "This isn't just about avoiding lawsuits or bad press, it's about doing what's right, and if anyone here doesn't believe in that mission, you're free to leave." The room fell silent, no one moved. After the meeting, David found Ava in her new office, reviewing the notes she had taken. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression a mix of admiration and curiosity. "You didn't hold back," he remarked. Ava looked up, a hint of a smile on her lips. "I didn't have to. If they're serious about change, they'll rise to the occasion." David stepped into the room, taking his seat across from her. "You're remarkable, you know that?" Ava raised an eyebrow, her smile widening. "Flattery won't get you out of taking me to dinner tonight." David laughed, the tension of the day easing slightly. It wasn't flattery, it was the truth. Watching you today, it reminded me of why I fell in love with you. Ava leaned back in her chair, her expression softening. And what's that? You don't just see problems, you solve them, David said, and you do it with grace and strength. Ava reached across the desk, taking his hand in hers. And I wouldn't be able to do it without your support. David squeezed her hand gently. You don't need me to do this, Ava, but I'll always be here to back you up. Ava nodded, her resolve strengthening. Together, they were ready to reshape not just the airline, but the industry itself, and this was only the beginning. A month into the implementation of Ava's diversity and inclusion initiative, the airline's atmosphere was already beginning to shift. Policies had been rewritten, training sessions were underway, and the anonymous reporting system was live. Ava poured her energy into every detail, her dedication unmatched, yet she knew the true measure of progress would be tested in moments of crisis, not in controlled environments. It was a crisp morning when Ava received the call. She was in her office, reviewing the latest employee survey data, when her assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. The young woman's face was pale, her hands clutching a tablet. Mrs. Robinson, she said hurriedly, we have a situation. Ava set down her pen and gave the assistant her full attention. What's happened? There's an incident at gate 27, the assistant explained, handing Ava the tablet. The live feed from the security cameras showed a scene all too familiar, a black man in business attire being stopped at the gate by an irate gate agent. The agent's body language was defensive, and the passenger appeared calm but visibly frustrated. Ava's chest tightened as she watched the interaction unfold. Memories of her own ordeal surged to the surface, but she pushed them aside. This wasn't about her, it was about ensuring no one else had to endure what she had. She stood abruptly, grabbing her blazer. Contact David and let him know what's happening, she instructed. And have security meet me there. By the time Ava arrived, a small crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves. She moved through them with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, security following closely behind her. The gate agent, a young woman named Claire, was mid-sentence when she spotted Ava. Her face drained of color, and she stammered, Mrs. Robinson, I didn't realize. Ava raised a hand, cutting her off. What's going on here? She asked, her tone firm but even. The passenger, a tall man with a briefcase and a calm demeanor, stepped forward. I was told my ticket needed further verification, he said, despite presenting my ID and confirmation number. Ava turned to Claire, her gaze piercing. Is that true? Claire hesitated, her eyes darting to the ground. I thought his ticket might have been fraudulent, she said weakly. We've been trained to look out for suspicious activity. Ava's voice hardened. And what exactly about this man's ticket or his appearance seemed suspicious to you? Claire opened her mouth but faltered, her silence spoke volumes. The passenger folded his arms, his frustration now evident. I've flown with this airline for years without issue, he said, but today I'm treated like a criminal. Why? Ava turned to him, her expression softening. Mr. Carter, I want to personally apologize for this experience. It's unacceptable and does not reflect the values we're working to uphold. Claire interjected, her voice desperate. I didn't mean any harm. But harm was done, Ava said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. Mr. Carter was humiliated in front of his peers because of your assumptions. That's exactly what we're trying to eliminate. She gestured for a nearby supervisor to step forward. Escort Mr. Carter to first class, Ava instructed. Ensure he's comfortable and compensated for his time. The supervisor nodded and guided Mr. Carter toward the boarding tunnel, offering quiet reassurances. Ava turned back to Claire, who looked on the verge of tears. Claire, Ava began, her tone firm but measured, I understand that unconscious bias can influence decisions. That's why we've implemented training and new policies to prevent situations like this. Claire nodded, her voice trembling. I've attended the sessions, Mrs. Robinson. I thought I was doing the right thing. Ava sighed, her expression softening slightly. Mistakes happen, but accountability is key. I'll review this incident with HR, and you'll be required to attend additional training. For now, you're suspended pending investigation. Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but she nodded. I understand, she whispered. Later that evening, Ava and David sat in their living room, the glow of the fireplace casting warm light across the space. Ava recounted the day's events, her voice calm but tinged with weariness. "You handled it perfectly," David said, his tone reassuring. "This is exactly why you're leading this effort." Ava leaned back against the plush cushions, her thoughts distant. "It's progress, but it's also a reminder of how far we still have to go. People like Claire don't act out of malice, they act out of ignorance, and ignorance is harder to fight." David reached over, taking her hand in his. "You're fighting it every day," he said, "and every day you're making a difference." Ava smiled faintly, her resolve rekindled. "I just hope it's enough." "It will be," David said with certainty, "because you won't stop until it is." As the night deepened, Ava's thoughts returned to the passenger at gate 27, his frustration, his dignity, and the strength he showed in the face of adversity reminded her of why this mission mattered. This wasn't just about fixing an airline, it was about reshaping a culture, and she was ready to see it through, one battle at a time. The following week, Ava walked into the airline's headquarters with her usual grace, but there was an unmistakable fire in her eyes. The previous incident at gate 27 had reignited discussions across the company, both supportive and contentious. Ava knew that change, real change, never came without resistance. She stepped into the executive boardroom, a cavernous space with sleek glass walls that reflected the city skyline. The air felt heavy with anticipation as the board members gathered. Some offered polite nods as she entered, others avoided her gaze entirely. At the head of the table, David sat with his usual air of quiet authority, but today his presence felt more like a buffer against the brewing tension. "Thank you all for joining us," David began, his voice calm but firm. "As you know, we've made significant strides in implementing the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. However, recent events have highlighted that there's still work to be done." Ava rose from her seat, her gaze sweeping across the room. "The incident at gate 27 was a clear reminder of the biases we're still battling," she said. "It's not enough to issue policies, we need to ensure they're being followed, and that starts with leadership." One of the board members, a man in his 50s named Richard, leaned forward, his expression one of polite skepticism. "Mrs. Robinson, while I agree with the importance of inclusivity, these changes are causing operational disruptions. Our employees are overwhelmed by the additional training sessions, and some feel that these measures are excessive." Ava met his gaze without flinching. "Excessive," she repeated, her tone measured. "I would argue that allowing discrimination to go unchecked is what's truly excessive. If our employees feel overwhelmed, perhaps it's because we're addressing issues that have been ignored for too long." Another board member, a younger woman named Julia, spoke up. "I understand the need for these changes, but we're also hearing concerns from high-level staff about the anonymous reporting system. They feel it opens the door for false accusations." Ava nodded, acknowledging the point. "That's a valid concern," she said, "but we've implemented safeguards to ensure that every report is thoroughly investigated before any action is taken. The system isn't perfect, but it's a step toward accountability, and accountability is non-negotiable." Richard wasn't satisfied. "Mrs. Robinson, you're asking us to overhaul decades of established practices. That's not something that happens overnight." "No, it doesn't," Ava agreed, her tone sharpening, "but complacency isn't an option. Every day we delay is another day someone experiences what I did, or worse." Richard opened his mouth to retort, but David intervened, his voice cutting through the tension. "Ava is right," he said. "This isn't about maintaining comfort, it's about building a better company and a better culture." Ava glanced at him, grateful for his support, then she turned back to the room. "I know this is uncomfortable for some of you," she continued. "Change always is, but ask yourselves this: do we want to be an airline that reacts to discrimination after it happens, or do we want to be leaders in preventing it?" The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air as the tension settled. Julia spoke up again, this time with more conviction. "I think Mrs. Robinson makes an excellent point," she said. "We can't afford to stay stagnant. If we want to attract top talent and maintain customer loyalty, we need to show that we're serious about these changes." Richard frowned but said nothing. Ava took a mental note of Julia's support. It was a small victory in a room where opposition had felt inevitable. After the meeting, Ava retreated to her office, where David joined her a few minutes later. He closed the door behind him, leaning against the frame with a small smile. "You handled that well," he said. Even Richard didn't know how to respond. Ava sighed, sinking into her chair. It's exhausting, she admitted, convincing people that equality isn't just a nice idea, but a necessity. David walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder. You're not just convincing them, you're changing minds. That's harder, but it's also more impactful. Ava looked up at him, her resolve softening into something more vulnerable. What if it's not enough? She asked quietly. What if the resistance is too strong? David crouched down to meet her gaze. You've already made more progress in a few months than most people do in years, he said. The resistance is proof that you're pushing the right buttons. Ava nodded slowly, her determination rekindling. Then I'll keep pushing, she said, no matter how long it takes. David smiled, his faith in her unshakable. I never doubted you would. As the evening approached, Ava's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Mrs. Robinson, a deep, unfamiliar voice asked. This is she, Ava replied, her tone cautious. My name is Anthony Carter, the man continued. You may not remember me, but I was the passenger at gate 27 last week. Ava's posture straightened. Of course I remember, Mr. Carter, how can I help you? I just wanted to thank you, he said, not just for how you handled the situation, but for everything you're doing. I've flown with a lot of airlines, but I've never seen someone take these issues as seriously as you have. Ava felt a lump form in her throat. Thank you, Mr. Carter, she said sincerely. That means more than you know. You're making a difference, Carter continued, and if there's ever anything I can do to support your efforts, don't hesitate to ask. Ava smiled, a spark of hope igniting within her. I'll hold you to that, she said. As the call ended, Ava sat back, the weight of the day momentarily lifted. The fight was far from over, but moments like this reminded her why it was worth it. She wasn't just changing policies, she was changing lives, and that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. Months passed, and Ava's initiative began to ripple across the airline industry. Articles praised her efforts, and employees who once feared to speak up now felt empowered to share their experiences. Yet, for Ava, the fight was far from over. Each success was met with new challenges, new skeptics, and new opportunities to prove that change was not only necessary but inevitable. Ava was invited to speak at a global aviation summit, a gathering of CEOs, executives, and policymakers. Her keynote address was the most anticipated event, and she knew the weight of the moment. Standing on stage, her voice was steady, her words purposeful. Diversity isn't just a corporate buzzword, she began. It's the foundation of innovation, growth, and trust. For too long, systemic bias has been an invisible barrier in our industry, stifling progress and alienating customers. It's time to tear that barrier down. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, but the real victory came afterward. Leaders from competing airlines approached her, asking how they could implement similar programs. Ava shared her knowledge willingly. The mission was bigger than one company. Shortly after the summit, Ava received a call from the Secretary of Transportation. Impressed by her work, they invited her to join a federal task force aimed at combating discrimination across all modes of transportation. It was an honor she hadn't expected, but one she couldn't refuse. David supported her wholeheartedly. This isn't just about the airline anymore, he said. It's about setting a standard for the entire country. With his encouragement, Ava accepted the position. Her role on the task force became a new platform for her advocacy, amplifying her voice and her vision. Meanwhile, Captain Matthew Blake faced the consequences of his actions. His termination was not the end of his troubles. A passenger advocacy group filed a formal complaint against him, and his record of discriminatory behavior was brought to light. Unable to secure a position at another airline, Blake filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against Ava's company. The legal battle drew public attention, and many rallied behind Ava. The trial became a symbol of the larger struggle for accountability in corporate spaces. During the trial, Ava testified, her words both sharp and resolute. This is not about one man losing his job, she said. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, can travel without fear of prejudice or humiliation. The court ruled in favor of the airline, and Blake's case was dismissed. The victory was a vindication for Ava and a warning to others who sought to hide behind outdated practices. Ava's work brought her closer to David in unexpected ways. Their shared mission became a cornerstone of their marriage, deepening their partnership. At home, they often talked late into the night, brainstorming ideas and reflecting on the journey they'd taken together. One evening, as they celebrated the first anniversary of Ava's initiative, David raised a toast. "To my wife," he said, his voice filled with pride, "for proving that change is not only possible, it's inevitable." Ava smiled, the weight of the past year lifting slightly. "And to you," she replied, "for standing by me every step of the way." Years later, Ava's work was recognized as a turning point in the airline industry. Policies she had implemented became standard practice, and her leadership inspired a generation of women and minorities to pursue careers in aviation. As she watched a new class of employees graduate from the company's training program, now named the Robinson Initiative, Ava felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and arduous, but every challenge had been worth it. Standing beside David, she reflected on the moment that had sparked it all. A humiliating encounter at a boarding gate. What had been meant to break her had become the catalyst for change, not just for her, but for countless others. And as the applause filled the room, Ava knew that the fight for equality was far from over, but she also knew that the seeds she had planted would continue to grow, carrying her vision into the future. This wasn't just her victory, it was a legacy, a promise, a movement.